Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome for joining us today for this webinar on web development, websites for your small business. My name is Jessie Yankee. I'm the director at the Missouri Women's Business Center. And I know we have some new people on this webinar today, so I wanted to do a brief overview of the Women's Business Center. So we're part of a nonprofit called Central Missouri Community Action, and what we do is help entrepreneurs start and grow businesses. So right now we're doing tons of one-on-one counseling of navigating all the federal resources, connecting businesses and entrepreneurs to other resources they need. And a huge question that we get all the time, whether COVID or not, is web design and marketing. So I brought together a few awesome ladies here. These are all local mid-Missouri women-owned web design firms. I also have Sarah from the Missouri Women's Business Center on this call as well. She's going to be helping moderate the chat so that after we get through with some of our discussion, we'll open it up to questions. This will also be recorded and available on our Facebook page later today. So I'll just call on you guys to introduce yourselves. Kristen, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Kristen Brown, and I'm the owner of Hoot Design Company. We are an ad agency located in downtown Columbia, and we specialize in branding and all the things that have to do with branding, and your website being probably the #1 source of information when it comes to your brand.
Awesome. Thank you. Erica?
My name is Erica Martin. I am the chief of everything at Pixel Jam Digital. I specialize in website design and development, but mostly development when it comes to front end and back end. So as much as I like the aesthetics of building a website, I really like to nerd out and get into the programming as well, so the website functions well.
Love that. And lastly, we got Tisha.
Hi, I'm Tisha Spencer with Firehouse Design, and we're located in Jefferson City, Missouri. And we really specialize in branding and front-end design. A little different than Erica, we have back-end developers that we work with. And this is our 25th year in business.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for sharing. So I tried to bring together kind of a few different web developers, and we're going to talk a little bit today about how there's a range of developers and designers, and what is the right designer for your business. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. The first one that we talked about was, many businesses and people on this call feel lost on how to even get started with a website. Or what we see a lot is they have like a website that they kind of started 5 years ago that they've never done anything to. So what's the first step for a business to take to get a functional website up and going for their small business? Why don't we start with Erica?
So I will always say progress over perfection, especially right now. It's much better to have a digital web presence than nothing at all. But as you're getting started, it's important to kind of think not just what you need in a website right this moment, but what you're going to need 6 months, a year, even 2 years from now, so you're not having to change platforms. I know it can be really easy for a lot of small businesses to want to get started using like a Wix or Weebly website because it's cheap, cost-effective, and very time-efficient for them to get started. But those don't always they're not always long-lasting, essentially, especially if you're wanting to grow your business web presence.
Thanks, Erica. Kristen.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing I like to ask people is, what do you actually need your website to do, and to really think about the return on investment for yourself. So we have a lot of people come to us and they'll say, I really wanted to do X, Y, and Z, but are these things that you need it to do now? So I agree with what Erica is saying. We work really closely with Erica and Pixel Jam Digital. But I would also say, if you don't have the budget for something more robust right now, what do you actually need your website to do today? And so, could a brochure level site is what we usually call it when the site doesn't actually perform a ton of functionality. It's a more of a information source for your clientele. can you get that up and going quickly? Because I completely agree with Erica. You do need something. When people tell us that they don't, I really nowadays it's table stakes that you have a website. So I think it's a validator of being a business. In the real world today, you need some sort of digital presence that isn't, a Facebook page.
I love what you said, Kristen, because I think a lot of our clients feel they need the big flashy website that's very expensive, so then they get so overwhelmed by the project and the cost that then they do nothing. So I love that. And Tisha, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say in starting out, it's a combination of all of these things. It's like thinking big picture, long term, what's my ultimate goal? How do I organize that information? Who am I speaking to? All those sort of things, and get a plan. So it may be that, hey, I need a stopgap right now because my restaurant has to do online ordering, like starting now. We had several clients who needed that, and we had 24 hours notice. And so I worked night and day all through the weekend to get people up and running by Monday when it was released on Friday, that sort of thing. So there are those stopgap things that have to happen sometimes. But also as a business owner, make sure that you're thinking big picture. What do I need to communicate? What does someone who doesn't know anything about me need to know? What's my long-term goal for this? And get a plan for the real website that you can start wherever you have to start, to be honest. And then you build into the website that really says and does everything you want it to do, which is, probably a WordPress website at that point, or maybe more. But I think it's a combination of start where you have to, but have a plan for the end goal.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. And a reminder to our participants, you can drop a question in the chat as we go, if this is, firing any questions off in your brain, and we'll look at those at the end of this call. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. This is a big one that we see a lot, and we never know how to answer. So we often hear horror stories about people that have been either taken advantage of or were promised something that wasn't delivered. Basically, how can business owners identify a good web designer versus one that maybe isn't so good? And what are the traits to look for there in identifying who they should be working with? Why don't we start with you, Tisha, since you went last time?
Well, I would say on that is a half-hour conversation with someone on the phone will tell you a whole lot. It'll tell you their experience level, how long they've been around. To be honest, we experience a lot of that where maybe someone built a website for a small business and it functioned and it was fine, but then they disappeared. That's probably about half the business that we get, is that people come to us and say, my web developer disappeared. Not sure where they're all going, but so that's part of it. Sometimes they, it was a part-time thing and they went on to other things, and that's all right. But so talk to them on the phone. Make sure if you can't have that one-on-one face-to-face conversation, be sure to have a good long conversation, and they should be able to explain to you the why and the how. And yeah, some of web development is going to sound like Greek to you, but if they can't put it in layman's terms that you can understand, you should move on, because it's probably not going to be a good relationship long-term. So a good in-depth conversation, I think, is something, and knowing the background, where the site will be hosted, that you own your own domain, all of those things that you need to make sure that you do up front as a small business owner, because again, we end up with a lot of business because small business owners have been through a nightmare with a website. And I really hate that for people. It wastes a lot of their time that they should be spending on their own business.
Tisha, I'm so glad you said that, because so a little background about me is I used to own an IT company. So we didn't do web design, but we worked with a lot of designers. And we had a lot of clients whose domains were being held hostage by a previous web designer. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I forgot about that. So if anybody on this call, don't ever let a web designer, purchase your domain for you, unless it's any of these three women who I do trust. So Erica?
Yeah, so kind of expanding on that, I would totally agree. The business should retain ownership of their content, of their website, of their domain, have the ability to, if they need to change hosting, Like they have full administrative access over their website. I also see that a lot of times where someone will come to me and say like, here's my website. I can't transfer anything out of it because the original developer owned it. Even including email addresses. They're having to get started all over with their email address because they can't transfer out of it. And I also really agree that communication is key. Some of us programmer developers don't always like to be extroverted and communicate with people, but I think it's important that you don't feel like you're being talked down to and in such a way where it becomes negative or you feel embarrassed because you don't know all the terminology. They should be able to explain it to you, have no problems communicating that to you, so you feel very comfortable with the relationship you're getting into.
Thank you. Kristen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo what these ladies are saying. And I think it is such an issue of you don't know what you don't know. And so it has everything to do with the right type of relationship. The only thing I would add is that I welcome people to call our clients that they can see, websites that they see on our website. Like a lot of those are local business owners, and I would welcome you to, call those people and ask them about the experience they've had, because to me, it's very similar to when I go to like renovate a home or get my car fixed. I don't know what they're talking about. And so I think it's so easy to be misled the way that everyone has mentioned, with not owning your domain, not being able to actually update your website. And it has so much to do with kind of the ethics of the business owner. And so making sure that that is someone that you can trust based on what other people that have said, I think is super valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Along the same lines, and I didn't prep you guys for this one, but I thought you guys might have some insight of, if you are working with a web developer to get started, what basic reports would be expected for you guys to provide? I mean, if someone has gotten into a relationship with maybe a rogue web developer, what are some of those basic things they could be asking for to kind of quality check what they're doing, whether it's analytics or what types of reporting do you guys do for your clients? Kristen, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. We actually wrote a blog post about this that I'd be happy to send you, Jesse, after we had an experience with someone whose domain was being held hostage. And it's a checklist of all the things that, you need to own and be able to manage as a business owner. I personally feel really strongly that you also need to be able to update your website. And this is, I think, probably more of a controversial statement because, certainly there are needs for websites that make it impossible for the business owner to be able to manage, meaning it's just too in-depth of a website build. But for example, I was recently working with someone locally who is working with a company outside of town to build a very special website. They told her that she would be able to edit everything. And sometimes I think business owners hear what they want to hear too. So maybe that wasn't communicated, but what the owner heard was, I will be able to edit everything. And we were able to clarify that no, she will only be able to edit the blog. So that's the type of stuff that is so critical that you understand. What are your editing capabilities? Because when it comes to something like coronavirus and the COVID-19 urgent situation, not being able to edit your own website immediately became a very big deal. And so I think those are the types of questions that I think need to be asked up front, and to make sure that best practices are being used. Google Analytics is a great example of, like, if the analytics are not built into the website from the beginning, you lose all of the traffic data that you would have been getting up until that it can be installed. So I really think doing some research on best practices and what you should know before you get started so that you have a checklist are really important. But to me, the top three are, do I own the domain? Do I own, where will this be hosted? And what are my editing capabilities?
Wow, that's really helpful. Thank you, Kristen. Erica, did you have anything to add?
I'll kind of elaborate more on the data and analytics side of things. So like Kristen mentioned, if a website doesn't have any type of analytics set up right when it's launched, you kind of lose out on getting all that data. Google Analytics can't go and backtrack to give you that user information. So one thing I like to do, especially if it's a website redesign or rebuild, if the site does have Google Analytics or some type of data tracking already installed on it, getting all that information and creating it as kind of like a baseline for performance. So that way we can maybe look at what's working now, what's not working well. And then once the website gets launched, 2, 3, even 6 months down the road, then we can reevaluate saying, oh yeah, this is working and performing a lot better than it was. Or maybe see, okay, there's still room for improvement. So having some type of benchmark for that data, I think is really handy.
Awesome. Thank you. Tisha, anything to add on your end?
No, other than sometimes we just start at the core level with folks. So I just want to say things like your domain is your address, your www address. And so when we say own your domain, it means that you own that. For instance, ours firehousedesign.com. It is registered in your name and not someone else's name, and that you have access and control over that. So that's that portion. The hosting is essentially like renting space to set your website. So hosting is that spot on the internet where your website lives. The domain points to it, and then boom, it shows up on the internet. And so those are those kind of just basic elements that you need to know, and just like these ladies have talked in more detail.
Wow, thank you, Tisha. Sometimes I forget that we do need to keep it at basic level and really explain things and not use acronyms. We're very bad at that in a government-funded job, that we use a lot of acronyms. So we kind of talked about some of the mistakes, other than the things like letting someone else, purchase your domain and other things like that we've already discussed. What are some other big mistakes that you see small businesses make with their initial websites? Kristen.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to focus on here is, coming from more of a branding and design point of view, is just to, keep it simple, stupid. So I'm sure people have heard that before when it comes to marketing. And I think it's so critical that people understand what you do within the first 5 seconds of landing on your website. And so often I find that small business owners, especially, who have to wear so many hats, they really want their website or even their logo to work so hard for them. They want it to communicate everything about their business. And you really have to create a hierarchy of communication, and the homepage is extremely valuable real estate. So what do people need to know about you right away? I really recommend Story Brand. I think it's a wonderful book for people starting out, and it's very digestible. And he walks through a lot of information about creating a fabulous website, whether you're working with someone or doing it yourself.
Awesome. And it was called Story Brand, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll drop a link to that in the comments whenever I post this. Tisha.
Well, I'm going to use mine as an analogy here, because probably the biggest thing that we see with small business owners is they wear so many hats. I'm sure these two ladies would agree with me. A lot of times I say I'm everything from president to janitor here, because there's only 6 of us. So there's lots of work to be done. And all small business owners are in the same boat, I'm pretty sure. And so what we find is that the website gets put on the back burner and sort of strung out over months and months and months and months without a clear plan. And so small business owners, if you can sit down and write out your goals, who are you speaking to? What's those key phrases, those key bits of information that Kristen was talking about that you need to communicate? Get those down and start organizing it into concepts and hierarchies, like Kristen said too. That's really good, where you're saying, I need to communicate this first, and here's all of the details about this. You're really creating a site structure. We're going to use big fancy terms, but you're organizing the information, and devote the time to getting all of that, all of those concepts, everything that you want to communicate, gathering all the photos. I know you have photos, they're somewhere. Get them from your staff. Start pulling all that in, and really set a week aside, if you can, to devote to it. And so instead of having a website that's sort of a website that's strung out over the next 6 months to a year, and you're really unhappy with your web designer and the price of the whole disaster, if you really spend the time up front to get a plan, set out and build it, you'll be much more pleased with the end result.
That's great advice. And now my brain is firing that maybe we need to do a like a working webinar where people can sign up, and we'll do like, you know, a walkthrough of everything they need to do. So we'll do a part 2 on another week. Erica.
So I completely agree with what Kristen said about branding. I think that's incredibly important, and what Tisha said about communication and structuring your website. So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective and talk about hosting and performance and security. So I think that's one area that can get easily overlooked, because it can be so easy to see a GoDaddy commercial pop up and think, wow, $4.99 a month, $4.99 a month for hosting, that's cheap. I can get my website up and running for really inexpensive. What some of those costs don't factor in is speed and performance. So when you're getting clients saying, wow, your website's loading really slow, I can't even place an order because not everything's populating, that could be an issue. You get into security. So I am going to throw a term called SSL out there. It's a certificate that essentially assures users that you have a secure connection to this website. So a lot of these really inexpensive hosting options don't provide an SSL security certificate, and then you're having to either forego that and it poses a security threat to your customers, or you have to add it on and it costs as an additional expense every month. And then it also gets into just basic website security in general. So WordPress websites, as much as I love them and as much as I use them too, it is an open source platform, meaning they are regularly updating the platform because there can be security issues with it. So making sure you have decent security in place on your website, that the website's staying up to date. So a lot of these are the more technical aspects that are really easy to overlook, or just go that cheap, quick route without thinking of the long-term effects it could have on your site as a whole.
Thanks so much. That is a great point. And that's a great segue into the next question. So a lot of people on this call, and I'm looking through the participants, and it's a lot of people who are already in business, and I know most of them already have a website, whether it's just a splash page or a landing page. And many are interested in, okay, how do I start selling things on my website? How do I start doing e-commerce? So I think let's turn it to that now and say, okay, what is the basics to getting started with e-commerce? And the things to look out for there. And I know security is a huge part of that when you start messing with, you know, taking credit card payments and stuff. So Tisha, why don't we start with you about, you know, what's the first step of adding, you know, e-commerce platforms and what that looks like?
Well, we recommend using platforms that are already built, secure, that are universal platforms. We have clients using WooCommerce through their WordPress websites, or using an independent tool like Shopify, who they've just built a site independently through Shopify. And at times we have clients that have already built a site, but it's really lacking the design and branding that it needs. And so we end up altering an existing Shopify account with the design, the front end design of that. And so that's what I usually recommend, is use something that exists, that you know is a national platform. We've got another client on 3D Cart that really likes that tool. So what you don't want is what Eric is talking about, a fly-by-night kind of thing that is not secure, and you end up with a lot of issues that it's going to take you a lot more time to fix than it was just to pay for some things on the front side and get a secure e-commerce site.
Awesome. Erica.
Got to remember to unmute. So I would say, also knowing kind of who some of the participants are on the call, one thing to think of before picking a platform is, if you have some type of retail brick and mortar business, picking something that could integrate with your POS system is really handy, because then you're only having to manage inventory in one spot. So whether you have a proprietary POS system, a lot of times those can integrate with Shopify, or other types of systems like Stripe can go into WooCommerce. And so again, that way you're just managing inventory in one location, and then you can sell either in your retail shop or online. And that makes it a lot easier for you to manage in the long run.
Awesome. Kristen.
Yes, I just want to echo what these ladies have said, and I 100% agree that using an already established system that has been built is what I just cannot recommend that enough. I think when people try and build their own systems, or they hear from someone that they need to build their own system, that a lot of alarm bells would be going off for me. And people may not know that Kylie Jenner's like multi-billion-dollar business runs on Shopify. So I feel like that's a great tip. If if it's good enough for Kylie Jenner, it's good enough for me.
I love that. And I know that I'm sensing just, through the list of ladies and people on the call, if it was me, I'd be going, okay, so how do I determine which one is best for me? So I think what we'll do at the Women's Business Center is put together kind of a think tank mastermind where people can get on and talk about their experience with various, Shopify and these other products. I think that'd be pretty helpful to the listeners. And so I'll come back to you guys later and see if you want to help participate in that. Because I know a lot of this, people are thinking this is great info, but I have no idea how to, is Shopify best or is WooCommerce best? So I know that you guys that are listening are thinking that. So stay tuned and I'll put together something where we can chat through that piece. Okay, so this is always the huge question, right? And I know you guys get this question all the time. Budgeting for this bad boy, right? So let's talk about what a budget would look like a little bit for a basic website. That's just, your splash page. Here's our phone number. And then let's talk about a budget for, I've got the basic website, but I want to start getting these edits done to have Shopify or another e-commerce platform. So Kristen, since you're already up, why don't you go ahead and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question because I think people often come with, all ideas all over the place on what the budget should be. I would say we have a really interesting product that we've built over the last 5 years or so, where I think it's a really good fit for small business, independent business owners. And it's 2 phases. It's branding up front. So it's called speed branding. And then we call it site in a day. So like what Tisha said about, really getting this knocked out, because we see this as a major pain point for our clients, is dragging a project out like this over 6 months. And that's huge loss of time and energy and usually money. And so what we're able to do in this pretty efficient system is to offer branding and web design for right under 5,000. So for right under 5,000, we can offer you speed branding. So you're going to get your, logo and associated brand assets, fonts, colors, textures, etc., and a Squarespace website. So that's really key, is that we are not going to we cannot build Shopify and we cannot build WordPress this quickly. But for a lot of people who need a brochure level site, like you were mentioning, Jessie, this is a perfect fit. And you can come in right under 5,000. That's about the lowest we can go. And we do require that we have to do your brand, or your brand has to come from somewhere else professional. So that's a pretty big component too. We can't just do the website if you don't have an existing brand, because then we're basically building the plane as it's flying, trying to come up with brand assets as we're building your website, which we would not recommend.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. Tisha.
I think that's a good point about the branding part, because one of the pitfalls that I didn't mention earlier is if your website looks nothing like the rest of your brand, you have a problem. So it's really good to make sure that you're doing that branding portion first, or even if, this website is the first time you've really addressed branding, that's okay. Have those discussions first, though, so that can be applied to your website and you're not having to start all over again in a year when you decide what your brand is. We have started many clients with a Weebly website first because they are nonprofits, extremely small businesses, one-person businesses, that sort of thing that we've started on Weebly. We've started those as low as 1,000. And I would agree with Kristen that at that point, though, they have some sort of branding in place and we're building on that. Most of the websites we build are either that low at a Weebly sort of level where it is a templated website and it is a very basic build. On the upper end, we're usually building sites that are up to $7,500, $8,000. So there's a range there. I would say, a lot of those WordPress websites are in the $5,000 range and up. especially when you get into custom tools and e-commerce and a lot of the development. We're working on a site right now that's 90 plus pages. There's just a lot of organization and development to all of that in that much content.
Absolutely, absolutely. Erica, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so I would say a big difference between my business and both Firehouse and Hoot Design Co. is that I do not offer branding. So a lot of my website packages are less expensive, but they don't provide that additional value. And so I'll often say, okay, if you don't already have some type of branding in place, let me recommend some branding design houses here locally, because that is going to be extremely important. So with that being said, that's kind of where I'll reach out to other people and work with them to get the branding part done. I can do a super basic brochure level website on WordPress that doesn't have any customization. I was offering that as like a $500 starting value, especially going through like the connection exchange for very in the beginning stages of just starting out a business. Most of the websites I work on are in the $2,000 to $5,000 range. Those are usually built on WordPress. Sometimes they'll be Shopify implementations, and they really vary in what they offer. But again, since I don't provide branding, that part of the cost going into it does not necessarily factor in. So it's kind of one of those price points where it might seem a little bit lower initially, but I will very heavily suggest that you have all that branding and logo work and design already in place.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I think that's important for everybody that's on this call or watching is, the range is huge, and it depends on what you want, and people have to have realistic expectations and realize the amount of time and work that does go into what you guys do on the back end. As consumers, we just go, oh, look at this beautiful website I've got now. But I mean, that was hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of your guys' life. And so I think that's why it's so important to have those phone conversations like Kristen mentioned earlier of, really explaining what you're going after, and then being able to put together, this is what a realistic budget looks like there. So those were all the questions that we had started with. I saw a question through the chat, and that said, once your website is built, how often should you plan on having it professionally updated? Kristen, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I'm so glad that someone is thinking this way. So we really believe that we always say, I think someone mentioned this before, but your website is a living, breathing thing that should be constantly being updated and changed. And that has a lot to do with SEO too. Google wants to know that you are updating your website regularly. So that's a huge reason I think that you need to understand what are your editing capabilities. And you cannot take that at face value when someone says you'll be able to edit it. I would say how much, how, what would you say the usability is? We tell people that a Squarespace website usability is similar to Facebook. So like if you're someone who hates Facebook, you're probably not going to be someone who's editing your Squarespace site, because there is some technical knowledge necessary. But I do think that when it comes to being able to move forward as a business, it's just so critical to understand how much editing capabilities you have. And I would definitely start there. I would say professionally, that is so hard to answer. We work with people on a monthly basis. A lot of our clients, we call them retainers. And so we're constantly updating their website for them. Honestly, though, if someone were to ask me, like, what's my best recommendation, I would be updating your website weekly. With fresh content like blog content, or certainly any of this situation with COVID and stuff. That stuff needs to be updated very frequently.
Yeah, I agree. To me at the Women's Business Center, I look at you guys and web design like I look at accounting. And a lot of our business owners that are starting up come in and they're like, well, I can handle the books and I can handle the website. But honestly, as you guys know, as business owners, it's almost impossible to actually handle and stay on top of all that stuff. So we always recommend, using bookkeepers, and we always are recommending, look at retainer packages when you get to that level of having someone manage your site and your social media for you, because until you have a staff big enough to do it, it's tough to do. And with websites, you can see a return on that investment. Like we were saying earlier, a good web designer is going to be able to show, like, this is how many hits your website's getting. Let's talk about how we can transition those to getting items in your cart and things like that. Tisha, did you have anything to add to what Kristen said?
Yeah, I would say minimum of once a month. Everything needs to be being updated once a month, and staying on top of things. And some of you may have businesses where there's not a lot of fresh content, or you're not writing blogs because it just doesn't fit your business. But you certainly can at least change some graphics to reflect what's going on locally, what's going on, you know, with COVID, let's say, or what's going on seasonally, or that you have new products, that sort of thing. If people come back 2 and 3 months later and everything, it looks exactly the same, it's not good. It looks like you have a dead business as well.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you that I visited a few websites of different you know, resource partners like us, and they had nothing about COVID. So to me, it immediately made me think, oh, they must, are they even open? So I totally agree with you. Erica, did you have anything to add to that?
On top of what Tisha and Kristen mentioned, again, kind of getting into the data side of things, I think it's important to always be evaluating how your website is performing. So if you notice that your primary goal of your website is to get newsletter signups or for people to contact you through a form, and that's not happening, then it would be really good to be looking at that every couple months or so and saying, okay, do I need to change the structure of my website a bit to better funnel people and new customers the way I want them to be? So that's just kind of another perspective rather than like just the content focus on how often you should be updating and reevaluating things.
Awesome, thank you. A question from the chat, and you guys can just jump in now since these are kind of open questions, is who are some of the local branding houses that you guys recommend? If you don't have a brand and you're really just starting out, before you get to the website portion, who do you guys work with on branding? If I mean, Kristen, I know you do it yourself. I think Tisha, you do too, but Erica, you mentioned using some other brand houses, so we'd love to get some brand experts recommended as well.
Yeah, I would say like I have a very good working relationship with Hoot Design Co. So I'll work with them quite frequently. I haven't had the chance to work with Tisha yet at Firehouse, but I really enjoy working with these other brand houses who I can easily, you know, relate to and go back and forth, and we can have open communication with. There are a handful of local agencies, both in Columbia and Jeff City area, that I think provide that really good transparent communication like we've been talking about, and are usually willing to work with the client on, you know, even their outside web developer too, even if they're not necessarily doing web development.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, obviously us, you know, I would love to speak to anyone, and we can often work with people on payment plans or trying to make it as affordable as possible to create a brand. People that I think do it really well in town on a freelancer basis. So Jillian Tracy, I know she got married and her name is different, but I believe her business is still called Jillian Tracy Design. She is fabulous, and she's a one-woman shop, so I believe she's probably less of an investment than Hoot Design Co. is. I think if you like their brand, that's a really good indicator of someone you can trust. I think Evoke, the Evoke group, does a really great job. I think they're probably in a similar price point to Hoot. But those are people I really trust and would highly recommend. I also know May Create is also woman owned, and I think they do a fabulous job too. They have a little bit of a niche in the is it concrete? I think they've gotten into more of like construction now. Wow. As far as a niche they're developing. Yeah.
And I'll say I've worked with both Evoke Group and Jillian Tracy, and they're both wonderful.
We don't have as many options here in Jefferson City, to be honest. We're definitely the longest running one in Jeff City as far as branding and graphic design goes. But we have seen a lot of good designers come through. Columbia really has a lot of great resources for designers and agencies as far as branding goes, and just have all those discussions up front. No different than what we said earlier about the website is, how long have you been around? What's your experience? Let's see your portfolio. Let me talk to some of your clients. All of those things, and seeing a variety of styles, making sure that your designer is able to adapt and change and doesn't have just one style that they're really good at. A great designer is fluid. You won't be able to tell whether they designed this giant corporation that's very conservative and corporate, all the way down to the individual that's on a blueberry farm we're working on right now. You should be able to have that flexibility and see that in their portfolio.
That's a great tip. And somebody asked in the chat, and I think the answer is definitely, it says, so if your website platform is already via a website like Wix, would you suggest using a company like one of yours to change things up when you are ready for a refresh or rebrand? I think all of you would say absolutely, right? Let's have that discussion. At the end of the call, I'll make sure all of you give us your best contact information, and I'll make sure to list that on our Facebook page as well. I have one more question in the chat. It's a little bit more advanced. And so she says, I do have a website, Facebook and Instagram presence, but I've never done retail before, but I need to restructure my business because of the coronavirus. Do you suggest that I run the retail on my website, but then point it to via Facebook and Instagram, or have individual shop pages on each one? She wants to keep it simple, but she also wants to grab all of those customers across all of the platforms easily. What advice would you give her? Whoever's ready.
I don't mind fielding this one, and I'm sure you guys have something to add, but we would always recommend that you run your commerce from your website, and you use any other outlet. We have this graphic on our blog about, seeing your website as kind of the mothership, and all of these other places that you can gather traffic are pointing back to that. So I think that Facebook is a great example of like where you are just waiting for your consumer to be distracted. So it's kind of like squirrel, you might have a notification or a message pop up from someone else that takes you out, they're not as paying as much attention. So we always want to grab people from Instagram or Facebook, wherever. Pinterest is often overlooked as a great traffic source, and push them back to your website, which helps grow that domain authority, meaning the more traffic you have, the higher you will rank when people search for that type of product as well.
Awesome.
And I'll add to that saying, that, because I will also fully recommend, if you can have your e-commerce on your actual website, that would be the ideal scenario. I did recently work with a client where with their POS system and their brick and mortar, it was not possible to integrate that in WordPress. And so they had to go the Shopify route. So we created, all because of, the coronavirus, pretty much within 3 days created a Shopify site that housed all of their products so they could start selling e-commerce, with the intent that we'll eventually go back and tackle branding on that site, getting things better integrated between the two websites. So while yes, I would fully advocate for having e-commerce all on your main website, if you needed to go a route where you had two sites and like say a separate Shopify website, that can totally be done too.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You've got to do what you've got to do sometimes, especially when we hit months like we've recently hit. And so if you can pull that together with the branding, where people don't feel like they're going to, another planet now that looks totally different than what your site looks like. Again, that's that branding element. You can make that work. It can work and not feel too disjointed. So agreed with Erica. If it's integrated, it's better, but do what you have to do to keep sales up.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a big piece that we're working on at the Women's Business Center is, okay, in a month and 2 months, we're going to work on workshops of pivoting your business so that you can withstand something like this happening again, because this isn't the last time this stuff is going to happen to us. And so we want to make sure that next time there's a national disaster or worldwide disaster like this, that you are prepped and ready to go. So you're not calling one of these ladies saying, I need e-commerce tomorrow, So appreciate those comments. So we did have a comment in the chat that just said, thank you all so much. She didn't, she's literally making an adjustment right now because she didn't even know what the SSL meant. So thank you, Erica, for spelling that out. And I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to give us your contact information for anybody listening. Really appreciate all of your time today, and questions in the chat. If you have any more, let's just go ahead and we'll move those over to our Facebook page and connect you with the ladies individually. So Tisha, do you want to give us your contact information?
Sure. You can reach us in Jefferson City. Our phone is 573-893-6937. And our website is firehousedesign.com, and you'll find contact information for us there.
All right, Kristen?
Yeah, you can find us at hootdesignco.com. So it's HOOT as in Tom, designco.com. We have a form there if you want to submit an inquiry. We try to answer those within the hour. So that's another tip I would say about your website. If you can have a form on your website that comes directly to you for inquiries and you can respond to them, 80% of people go with the first person that responds to their inquiry. If you can contact us there. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, all of those at Hoot Design Co. And email is the best way to get in touch with me, Kristen, Kristen, at hootdesignco.com.
Awesome. And Erica?
Yeah, so for Pixel Jam Digital, my website is pixeljam.digital. You can use that same Pixel Jam Digital as social media handles, so Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then you can also email me, Erica, ERICA, at pixeljamdigital.com.
Awesome, thank you. I wanted to tell everybody on the call as well that, this isn't a secret that all the businesses across the US are ramping up their technology right now. And what's exciting about that is there's a lot of grant opportunities and things coming out, specifically to get a grant to help with website redesign and improvement. So as we're getting more of those in our pipeline, make sure you're following our Facebook page and getting our newsletter, because we're going to be putting all of those out there for you guys to hopefully access. And even if there's not grants, the Women's Business Center also has lots of access to microloans. We have clients come to us all the time, needing to borrow that $5,000 to be able to do these types of improvements. So reach out to us. We can get you in contact with any of these ladies. I appreciate the three of you so much for being on today. I think this was hugely helpful. And thanks for all of our participants. And I'll be in touch with you guys all soon. All right.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.